Well, hello everyone, officially, and welcome to the Community Marriage Initiative Fund's monthly training event. My name is Katie Ray. I'm with Marriage Initiative, and I have the privilege of working closely with our amazing CMI teams across the U.S. as we connect with each other, connect with marriage champions, and serve couples with intentional purpose in their respective communities. I'd like to thank you guys for joining us here today. But before we get started, I always like to do a quick recap of our previous month's CMI training event, so for September, for those of you who weren't with us. In September, we had the honor of hosting Julie Baumgartner and Anna Panter, where we heard Julie speak on kind of taking first steps as you begin building a community marriage initiative in your city. She also touched on the difference between messaging to partner channels versus public channels, as well as ways to kind of navigate the word marriage as it being a hot button issue in our culture today. And lastly, she answered questions on sustainability and diversified funding streams. We then ended our CMI presentation with Anna Panter. She's with Marriage Initiative, and she spoke on ways to prepare for conversations with different funders, and she took us through her very detailed and informative presentation. And moving on to this month, you will notice that we have a few familiar faces as well as one new one. But before I introduce our speaker, let's see, is Mr. Jason Oncaro with us? I didn't see him earlier. Let me see if I see him on today. He was supposed to open us in prayer. Jason, are you on? No, I don't think he's on. Okay. Carl, would you mind opening us in prayer this morning?
I will be honored to do so, and on Jason's behalf. Lord, thank you for Jason. What a remarkable young man he is. Thank you for just all of these great people that you brought together around this common mission of strengthening marriages by strategically investing in marriage. And Lord, I just pray for our time today. I pray that you will reside with us, that your Holy Spirit will dwell here, that you will sit among us, that you will speak through us, and that everything that we say and do would be honoring to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Carl. And Jason, I'm sure you're going to go back and watch this. I didn't mean to call you out. I promise you're not in trouble. But I just have to say that for the record. Okay, so we are going to get started. Let's see, I'm going to highlight Mr. Ron while I introduce him. So first on our agenda for today, we have Ron McLain. And to give you a little information about Ron, he has been married to Joan, his wife, for almost 53 years. And they have been in nonprofit ministry full-time since 1974. He has been involved in pastoral counseling most of that time. And in July of 2004, Ron and Joan formed the 501c3 nonprofit public benefit corporation called Marriage Mentoring Ministries Incorporated, kind of with the hope of helping churches in Central California train marriage mentors who would in turn help other couples begin and maintain a vital and healthy marriage. And then in 2006, they formed the Healthy Marriage Coalition of Fresno County, which reaches the faith community and beyond with relationship enhancement courses. Ron was ordained in 1985 as a minister of the gospel and received a master's degree in biblical counseling from Tyndale Theological Seminary and Biblical Institute in Fort Worth, Texas in 95. And Ron and Joan are the proud parents of 3 grown children and 6 grandchildren. So welcome, Ron, and thank you for being here with us today.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. And the best part of what you just said was grandkids. We're trying to figure out a way how people can have grandkids first.
I'm sure you spoil them. I'm sure you enjoy. You and Joan both spoil them.
Yeah, we feed them sugar and send them back to their parents. Yeah.
That's exactly what my parents do. And I just say, don't tell me what happened. I won't ask and everything will be good, right?
Yeah. Well, thanks for the privilege of allowing me to share a few things today. And as I see all these faces, I get excited because I realize sometimes you can start to feel a little bit isolated in what you're doing, but we are part of a movement that's nationwide. It's just exciting to see all these people and know that God is using us in some amazing ways, and very, very excited about what's happening here in Fresno. And just wanted to share really 3 principles today as I talk about rallying partners and local leaders. And so I'm going to talk about 3 principles that you could actually take the principles and apply them to your own situation where you're at. And so some of these may not apply exactly, and that's okay because we're all in different locations. So as we talk about rallying partners and local leaders, I think it's really important to realize that whatever we do, our activities, our classes, we always want to ask the question, are we creating value to the couples and to our community? And as we approach leaders and those who are influencers in our community, are we really coming to them with value that they will see, not only in the area of marriage ministry, but also in the area of helping increase the health of our entire community? So really, this is a community-wide movement and a county-wide movement, which will spread from county to county and eventually, of course, being a nationwide movement. And that's really what we're looking to accomplish. So the question is, how will this event or activity help strengthen marriages? I think we've all been to events where we walk away and we say, well, that was interesting. But we want people to come and walk away and say, now that was life-changing, because they're taking away either principles or skills that they can apply in their marriage and family that's going to really help take them to the next level. So those are good questions to ask, is how will this event or activity help strengthen marriages as we rally the faith community really together in the most part? So how will this give couples confidence to approach each other and build intimacy together? We talk about in our classes, one of the biggest problems in marriage is the fear of getting close. And so are we providing a valuable skill for the couples to actually leave here saying, I think we could actually sit down and work through this. We could actually talk through this. So we want to meet the needs of the couples attending, regardless of where they're at. We have people in our classes and activities that are in crisis. Most of our couples, I would say, are living like roommates. And we have other couples that have a relatively good relationship and want to go from good to great. So know where your couples are at, and then kind of step back and say, how can we give value to these couples that they can apply? And as far as the community, in our community, we have big relationship issues that contribute to high crime, domestic violence. We have some of the highest concentrated poverty in America here. And of course, the increased tax burden for divorces. So by teaching marriage skills and principles, I think couples are going to have the tools to stay together, to work through conflict safely. We've seen this, and thrive in their relationship with each other and their children. So also, obviously, given decreasing the divorce rate helps the economy and creates better employees in the workforce. So we have a way to reach out to our community in a way that I think will help rally those kinds of leaders. And we've seen that here in Fresno, working with business leaders, religious leaders, political, because it all really works together, doesn't it, as a community? And that's really what we want to do, is gather the community and move and create a movement that's really going to transform Fresno County. So the second principle is establish and build relationships. Julie last month said relationships. And I've been in enough Julie's her workshops to know that she doesn't just say that, she lives it, breathes it. And so that's one thing that we really are big on here in the Healthy Marriage Coalition, is building relationships at every level, and starting with influencers. So the question is, who do you know and who do they know? And so when we meet somebody, we always want to ask the question, do you know 2 other people who would have the similar passion that you do for creating healthy marriages and relationships? If I don't know the person, I ask, how can I get to know them? Reminds me of the story of being at a Smart Marriage Conference when I first started out the ministry. And Bill Coffin who at the time was known as the marriage guy at the White House, if you will, special assistant for marriage education for ACF, HHS in DC. I heard him speak at a smart marriage conference, and I approached him and I asked him, I said, hey, would you come to Fresno? He said, where's Fresno? No, he didn't say that. But would you come for a fundraising event and a press conference and to meet some of our political, religious, and media influencers? And he did. He came. He wouldn't have come if I hadn't have asked him. And so that's the principle too, to kind of hang on to as you build your local community and partners, is ask people to get involved. He came, and it was incredible. This slide that you have in front of you shows that Bill came. He spoke to Rotary Club. He spoke at a press conference where we had political, religious leaders there. TV stations covered it, interviewed Bill. We had a Catholic TV station, and then ABC News, Liz Harrison. And then Bill spoke at our annual fundraiser, and something interesting Bill did is he provided value beyond our fundraiser in that he taught a skill, which I thought was pretty cool. And from that example, every year we have a fundraiser, and every year top of mind is we are going to teach one skill to everybody that comes to our fundraiser that will help them increase their marriage satisfaction. So Bill was a great example in that area. So the point of this is get to know local pastors, have breakfasts and lunches, have interesting topics that you're going to talk about. We're right now planning a January get together on how to help hurting couples in your congregation. That's going to help rally counselors and therapists and pastors together as they learn, as we all learn together, really, what everybody's doing in the area of really helping couples. Because my experience in counseling over the years is couples will tend to hold it together during the holidays, and then about the second or third week in January, if you will, all heck breaks loose, and counselors and pastors are very busy all of a sudden because couples are thinking about throwing in the towel, and obviously we don't want that to happen. So anyway, that's just another way to gather leaders and community people that are interested in healthy marriages. So don't be afraid to get to know pastors. Go out there and meet pastors and let them know that you're there to help, and that you want to come alongside and provide services for them. Look at your local TV programming and talk shows. Who has an afternoon talk show? Email them, offer to come on as a relationship expert. We are relationship experts, folks. Did you know that? For instance, you could say in the email, we have 5 ways to build a healthy marriage, or here are 5 ways to build a healthy marriage around Valentine's Day. What you might do a thing on after every wedding comes a marriage. Here are 3 marriage busters and 3 marriage boosters. And I can guarantee you from having done this that those TV stations are looking for people to come on and speak about relationships. It's a big, big area. Media is really open and open to wanting to do things like that. Civic clubs schedule speakers regularly. As we talk about rallying leaders, the business community, that's one way to do that. Speaking to doctors, I recently had a client who was the head of one of our heart hospitals. And at the end of our time, I said, hey, you ever bring speakers in to talk to your staff about communication? And he says, yeah. And so we're in the process of getting that scheduled. So ask questions. Don't be afraid as you rally the troops. Ask questions. Invite people to be involved with this movement, because this movement is going to be so powerful. I think it's going to help change our nation. Yeah. But it starts with us. It starts with one relationship at a time. Excuse me, I'm going to get a glass. Excuse me, that's better. So churches need help in relationship skills. Women's directors at churches are especially interested in relationships. So reach out to them as well. Third principle, creating continuity between events. This is something that I think is really important as we rally the troops, as we get partners and local leaders involved, is we've got to keep this moving forward. This is a movement. A movement doesn't go backwards, it goes forwards. And so creating continuity means as we're teaching a class or as we're at an event or a breakfast or whatever else, we're always thinking about what's next. And we're going to let people know, here's the next event that we'd like you to attend. This particular slide talks about a gift certificate that we came up with to help give to people that are at an event so that they could take that gift certificate and hand it out to friends and family. And at one of the last classes we did for Master and Mysteries of Love, nearly 60% of all attendees brought a gift certificate that a Master and Mysteries of Love class graduate had given to them. So very, very interesting just to keep the interest going out there and the events going, and which will help to rally people to what we're trying to accomplish here. So creating continuity between events is so important. When we're doing a marriage education class, promote a prepare, enrich, or SYMBIS training event is one example of doing this. Or as we're teaching a class, talk about the marriage Olympics that you have coming up at a church, or the marriage retreat or marriage advance. So keep moving forward, because this movement does keep, and as we do that, it's going to build momentum and synergy. And it gets more and more exciting as you do that, because people can see they're a part of something bigger than themselves. So those are 3 principles that hopefully you can apply in your situation. And you know, if I can answer any of your questions, I think I'll be on afterwards. And then also my information will be given out. So if you want to contact me, I'd be happy to talk further about this. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for your presentation, Ron. And as I mentioned, Ron is part of a CMI in Fresno, which just happens to be one of our CMI grantees. And we are just always so inspired by the work they are doing on the West Coast. So thank you again to Ron and Joan. And next on our agenda, we have Mr. Dennis Stoica. And by now, most of you know Dennis is the founder and one of the funders of the CMI Fund, and really one of the most respected leaders in the relationship and marriage education field. And today, Dennis will be speaking on fundraising for your CMI through traditional channels of support. So Dennis, whenever you are ready, the floor is yours.
Perfect, great. Thanks very much, Katie. And Ron, interesting you spent so much time talking about Bill Coffin because yesterday or the day before, well, actually for the last 3 days, I've spent a lot of time with Bill Coffin in a conference we had with Lori Kramer in San Antonio, and Carl had a chance to actually meet Bill for the first time just a couple of days ago. So I'm sure Bill will be thrilled that we're talking about him. His ears are probably burning right now. So he's a great man. So glad to see that. Okay. Wondering, hey, so here's some information that some of you may or may not know. By the way, if you've read the memo I sent out earlier, you would know it, but I know that was just sent out an hour before, so you may not have read it. Carl and I are actually on the board of the NARMI. And in fact, we're 2 out of the 3 members of the strategic planning committee at NARMI, which means we kind of speak into where we at least hope the organization is going. And so the 3-page memo that we asked Katie to distribute earlier is actually a edited version of a 4-page report that the strategic planning committee delivered to the NARMI board just last month. And so one way to look at it is what we're talking about here today is some pretty leading edge stuff, at least where we hope it will go. So we're going to kind of walk through that. So this is not a traditional PowerPoint presentation. Instead, we simply edited a memo. And so I'm not going to read, thankfully, you'll be thankful I'm not reading the memo word for word, but you'll have it to refer to. And what I'm hoping, I believe, Carl, when we originally spoke, that I would have about 30 minutes. Now it'd be down to 25, giving you 15 minutes at the end is what I believe I had from a time standpoint. What I'm really hoping is that I can cover this material short of that to give time for discussion on it, because I think it's an interesting concept. So I'm hoping I'm not using all my time. We'll have to see. And so one of my opening statements in the email, in the memo to the NARMI board was, we have a funding crisis in this world, in our field. And I then lay out the content that I have here, which is that 10 years ago, or 2016, 15 years ago, the first round of funding for the Healthy Marriage Initiative was released at $150 million. And that has held the same for the past 16 years, despite there's been a 38% cumulative inflation, which has occurred since then. So we have 150 million of funding, and yet back in 2008, the Institute of American Values released a report entitled "The Taxpayer Cost of Divorce and Unwed Childbearing," which they estimated that the cost of family fragmentation was $112 billion each and every year. Well, that was 2008. Since then, we've had a 38% inflation. So really, the amount of the problem has increased. So that's now at $146 billion a year problem, and we have federal funding of only $150 million to address it. So 1/10 of 1% is being set aside from a federal government standpoint. And my next sentence says, I believe this is both a problem, but I'm going to look at it as a tremendous opportunity. And the next sentence is, it's a tremendous opportunity because each year, many billions of dollars are spent in the US trying to solve problems for which we believe relationship and marriage education programs can provide highly cost-effective, at least partial solutions. And so we've got two ways to potentially increase funding in the field. One is to get direct funding, try to get increased spending in the direct field of marriage education. And that's great, and we want to do that. But what this memo lays out is a different approach. This plays out the thing that says, hey, there are billions upon billions of dollars already allocated by various federal and state agencies, not to mention the amount of money spent by philanthropists, in various social service agencies that, guess what? We have a partial solution to. So the question becomes, how do we tap some of those dollars? And I want to walk you through 6 examples that we have. In particular, 3 of them, there's actually been case studies where we've been able to move the needle. All right, and so the first one is child support enforcement. And the first sentence in this bullet says, in 2021, combined federal and state administrative expenditures for child support enforcement amounted to $5.9 billion with a B, which resulted in nearly $30 billion of child support enforcement related collections. But recently, Jonine McKenzie's organization, Center for Relationship Enhancement, was involved in a project in which their program, called Motherhood Program, that's an adaptation of the Real Essentials program. The result of that was a 400% increase in child support payments. So let's look at this again. We're spending $5.9 billion a year in child support enforcement. And yet we have a relationship education intervention that has been shown in at least in the only place it's been tried and tracked that resulted in a 4-fold increase in child support payments. If that, in my last sentence in that paragraph, if that were successfully replicated and brought to scale on a national level, the return on investment would be phenomenal. So I use that as an example to say, wow, that's a huge bucket of money that we could potentially have access to. The second is divorce reduction. Now, at the last NARMI plenary, you saw me give a 40-minute presentation about how community marriage initiatives can drive down countywide divorce rates. Well, shortly after that, we came across a real interesting study that was actually published a few years ago. And I highlight this part where it says, for example, I'm just going to highlight so you can see what I'm referring to. According to a 25-year longitudinal study of 96 couples, only 5% of couples that had participated in a 12 to 15-hour heavily coached version of PrEP had gotten divorced after 20 years versus 26% of couples in a comparison group. So let's step back and look at this. And so interesting enough, Germany, this happened in Germany. Germany actually has an average divorce rate of 40%. Now, there were two groups of couples. One went through traditional vision-based marriage education, and after 25 years, 26% of them had divorced. So notice we saw a 30% reduction in divorce rate from standard vision-oriented marriage prep. But in a heavily coached skills-based program, that divorce rate fell to only 5% after 25 years. Now, that's an amazing result to actually track couples 25 years and see after 25 years only a 5% divorce rate. Now, don't go running off and saying, oh, well, that must mean that prep is the magic bullet. In my view, the magic bullet is the heavy coaching, because they had a ratio of one coach per two couples. And so what this talks about is, you've heard me say countless, the importance of vision, skills, and support. This speaks to the importance of both the skills and the support in a heavily coached environment. But look at the last sentence on this page. If this effort were implemented universally in the US with similar results, this would have the potential to eliminate 75 to 88% of the divorces which occur in the US each year, saving $30 billion to $35 billion in taxpayers' cost each year. Now, let's bring it back to your own community. And from the NARMI presentation, you see that the average taxpayer cost of divorce is actually $40,000 in today's terms. So I believe that that study actually gives us an opportunity to take that study in to our counties and say, hey, counties, you ought to be paying a significant premium to people that go through a serious marriage prep program. Now, many states have what I call a trivial amount of a premium paid. I think here in Florida, it's like $40 if you go through a marriage preparation program, okay? $40 is not enough to get many people motivated to do it. I mean, you think about it, it's $40. And by the way, here in Florida, it's a 4-hour program and both people have to go through it. So really, what a rational financial motivation would be, say, oh, you're paying us $5 an hour to go through class. It's not worth it to me. But since marriage prep, and by the way, even a 4 marriage prep program reduced it by 30%, you know what I'm saying? So not a heavily coached one, a vision one. Okay, so this would be an argument that says, wow, we shouldn't be talking about only $40 discounts on marriage licenses. We should actually be, from a public policy standpoint, paying our couples to go through marriage preparation. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that we have to increase the marriage license rate up to $300 so that we can give a discount to $200, although that is an option. But there's lots of ways for us to be looking at that, to be able to say, so my point on it is, if we're smart, we can be looking at ways, how do we access some of these other funding streams, because we can move the needle. We can move the needle. The third one example is domestic violence. And according to a report compiled by the National Network to End Domestic Violence, there are currently 31 different federal funding streams totaling $2.6 billion per year to deal with the issue of domestic violence. However, most traditional batterer programs are relatively ineffective, and the overall recidivism rate for domestic violence offenders is over 30%. However, there was a study done actually a couple of decades ago in which 90 violent couples were randomly assigned to 2 groups. 0 of the groups that went through a program called Relationship Enhancement, which, by the way, was the predecessor to Mastering Mysteries of Love, which Ron McLain spoke about earlier today, literally 0 of them were arrested again for the same offense in the year following the treatment, compared to 20% in the group that were untreated. That's a phenomenal change. So what does that mean? Domestic violence is a funding opportunity. So the point of this whole conversation is to say, let's look for non-traditional funding. So they're traditional funding sources, meaning that there's lots of funding there. but for us, they're non-traditional. Let me point out a couple of other examples. Education. Total expenditures for public elementary and secondary schools in the US were $800 billion in 2018 to 2019. I use that figure, I use all the figures in here in this one because it's pre-COVID. All right. So here's a question. Can we show that providing relationship and marriage education programs to a high percentage of parents of school-age children can increase student test scores in schools? I submit that not only can we prove it, I submit we should prove it. And in fact, the Community Marriage Initiative Fund is going to be looking at opportunities to do pilots to test that exactly, is to see what happens in school districts or schools in which we dramatically increase the exposure or participation. It's really participation levels in marriage and relationship education at the parent level. And here's one way to look at it from a cost benefit standpoint. In fiscal year 2019, I use that year before it's COVID, the National School Lunch provided 4.9 billion lunches across the United States at a total cost of $14.2 billion. Let me say it again. We spent $14.2 billion providing school lunch programs across the United States. So now, what's the justification on why we're spending $14.2 billion in the school system? Well, the answer is very short. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which shows that kids that are starving won't be able to learn. I submit to you that kids that are in a highly disruptive family environment will also not be able to learn very well. It's all about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're hungry, you can't concentrate. If you're scared that your family's going to be torn apart, you can't concentrate. And I remember a webinar that I was involved, a participant in probably 10 years ago now, where a child psychologist by the name of Pat Fagan said that he was by the way, he's well known in the marriage field. And he said that when I was a child psychologist, I got to the point relatively on that he said, I was always referred to the most troubled kids. But I got to the point where I said, you know what? I'm not even going to meet with a troubled kid until I've met with their parents together at least 3 times. And then he went on to say, in the vast majority of times where I did that, I never actually had to meet with the kid. He says, once I straightened out the marriage relationship, all the kids acting out went away. It just completely disappeared. So that's education, a huge opportunity. Let's look at the child welfare system. Can we show that providing marriage and family strengthening programs to the parents of children that are in the foster care system can reduce the amount of churn that is failed placements in the system? And I have to say, one of the biggest challenges in the foster care system is failed placements. In other words, kids, parents take a kid in, but participating in the foster care system is a huge marital stressor. If we can equip the couples to be able to successfully navigate all the stresses in their marriage, I believe that will significantly reduce the amount of failed placements or churn in the child welfare system. And as the next sentence says, state child welfare agencies spent about $33 billion on child welfare purposes during fiscal year 2018. Imagine if we had 1% of that. We had 1% of the $33 billion. Wow. What kind of an impact could it make in the child welfare system? Prisons and jails. Can we show that providing our programs in those environments would decrease recidivism rates? The total US government expenses on public prisons and jails is $80.7 billion per year. Most of that money is spent on repeat offenders. Can you imagine if our intervention could be shown to actually decrease the amount of recidivism? Because what it would do would be dramatically reduce the population in prisons and jails. So what's my overlying message here? It's this, well, I'll frame it this way. Ron started by, or gave an example of mastering the mysteries of love. And the core skill taught in MML is the skill of empathy. And an easy way to describe empathy is the ability to step into somebody else's shoes. What I'm suggesting is that we need to develop empathy with our funders. In other words, we need to become experts on what's important to potential funders. What does their world look like? And how can our intervention help solve their problems? Especially those problems that have, as these 6 examples did, huge amounts of funding there. And then create opportunities or invite yourself in to do pilots in those environments. And all of us, most of these that I just went through, have funding at the county level, perhaps all 6. I didn't really look at it from that point. But in other words, you all have an opportunity to be going to each of these funding streams and say, wow, could we do a pilot? And what we want on the pilot when you're doing that is to be able to say, we want a pilot that will actually be able to prove this hypothesis, because we theorize that we can move the needle. So we're not asking just for money to run a program. What we're asking for is money to run a pilot in which a group of people will participate and a group of people will not participate. May or may not have to be randomly assigned. There's other ways around that. But you basically want to say, we want to prove the concept and we want to do a pilot. And we think this would be a really effective use of some of your funding to be able to prove the concept out. And so that's the general concept. And I'd love to get some feedback from the rest of the group. And Carl, I'll leave it up to you whether you want to have 8 minutes of discussion on this now, or if your preference would be to you do your presentation and then have the discussion. Carl, you're the boss, you get to choose.
I yield my time to the gentleman from Florida.
Yeah, okay, so we'll just take, 7 minutes so I can turn it back to Carl by, at the 45-minute mark. But I'd like to hear, what are general thoughts about what we've said? I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I don't know, Katie, I don't know if you want to unmute everybody or let them wave their hands and unmute them, however you want to do it.
If anyone has a question, if you could virtually raise your hand, you just use the icon. We can call on people that way if that's okay.
And actually, I'm less interested in questions, because all questions will mean all questions will mean is that I'm speaking again. What I'm more interested in is your reaction. Who has a reaction? Jimmy is raising his hands first. Katie, can you unmute Jimmy?
Okay. Hey, Dennis, that was incredible. The amount of money that we're just, I'm not going to say we're throwing it at problems, but it does appear that way. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, we hear you.
Okay, cool. Man, I'm just interested in the feedback that we would get, not particularly on an election year, because you tend to hear what you want to hear or what they think that you want to hear. But moving forward, I would like to hear from some of our politicians on what their solution is to this, particularly from a Florida standpoint, because this is a ridiculous amount of money just being spent. So thank you for raising our awareness.
Yeah, and a comment on that. And what's interesting is there's multiple ways to access this funding. So some of it could be through the legislature, but some of it could actually be just from the county agencies. And that's where I'm suggesting all of us be thinking about.
You're saying it's probably already, some of it may already be there. We just need to sit in on some county commission meetings and just see what they say and see what they can do, right?
So yes, that's my point, is the money is already allocated. The money is already being spent. And I wouldn't do it by meetings and county commissioners. It would be one-on-one meetings. It could be county commissioners, or it could be with advocates at the county level. So if it's education,
Gotcha.
meet with people at the county school board, but not random people. What you want is, you want to be finding your friends. Who are the allies? Who already have a heart for this type of thing? I'd love to hear Jerry's reaction, because Jerry actually has lots of contacts in the public policy or legislative world in Missouri. So Jerry, what would you like to say? And we'll get to you,
Well-
Rosalind, but I wanted Jerry to go first. Go ahead, Jerry.
Dennis, I'm very excited that you put this letter out. I haven't had a chance to read it line by line. I just kind of skimmed through it, but I love that you're doing this. It's going to assist me in some meetings that I'm planning to have with local leaders and state leaders. One of the maybe a question that I'm going to put out there, but maybe put to the side. It almost appears to me that you're thinking that you might be thinking of creating a intermediary group that could help advocate to get funds for grantees. And I think that's probably an interesting idea, where because there's a lot of us that may not know where to begin, who to talk to, haven't built those relationships. And that might be a need where there's an intermediary that can say, hey, look, here's how we did it, and these are some people that you can go and contact. I think that would be very helpful to me and everybody on the call, because I'm doing that from scratch. I've spent years building those relationships with these state leaders, but what this letter does for me is in you're kind of throwing these ideas out there, especially with the domestic violence. Yeah, if we had better relationships at home, we wouldn't have a need for that program. And so these are giving me ideas when I have those conversations with the people who hold the purse strings on this funding.
Absolutely, you're exactly right, and you're right on the intermediary. What Carl and I are proposed in the letter that started with is that NARMI would step into that void, because what we're trying to avoid here, and what I'm trying to avoid here in terms of being one of the leaders of the entire movement, I'm trying to avoid the current phenomenon in that each of us appear to have to be reinventing every wheel.
Yep.
Okay. And that's what I'm trying to avoid. And so this is kind of a pre-announcement, you could say, of where Carl and I are kind of hoping the field will go, because some of you, or many of you, can be those leading edge people. And so part of this is solicitation of your own thoughts on it. And Jerry, as you said, you've been swimming in these waters for a while. And so part of it is, what have you learned in some of these areas? And so that all of us that are pioneers in this area, what we've all learned some stuff. What can we share? What wisdom? And do we know of other pilots that have been done that show? So yes, to everything you've said. Rosalind, I'm sorry, Jerry, go ahead.
That's okay. I wanted to add one other thing. Even if you go and build a group or a team or an entity or whatever it is to stand in the gap between the funding and the grantees, there's still going to have to be boots on the ground that are going to have to build those relationships. It'll be more organized and a little bit easier because there'll be some direction there that I'm assuming you're going to be building, but we still need to not just rest, because those relationships are going to have to be built, and they may change after elections. Because to be honest, these are the people that are, we're voting on this kind of thing, and things are getting allocated, and you have to know the people to get the funding.
Yeah, I want to be clear. Bill and I are not proposing that. Carl and I are not proposing that NARMI be this intermediary group that doles out grants. What we're proposing is what you were saying, Jerry, is that we become like a repository of the resources, so that if there are people that want to be, working in the area of domestic violence, is that we kind of help collect the information and we be that connector. And it really comes down to the phrase, I just don't want everybody to have to be reinventing the wheel.
Right. Here is the way you approach DVIS funding is this. Here, take that, go talk to your DVIS contact in your local state. Those are the things, that's how I would like to use it. I mean, that's just my idea. Or this little program over here at school, the education part. Here's how we would approach the education department to get that kind of funding.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
If you could equip us with that kind of stuff, I think it would be helpful. And then we just have to be seekers.
Yes, but part of it, it's not just me magically equipping, because I'm not the expert in all the areas.
Okay,
instead,
I can't hear.
Instead, it's identifying who the experts are, identifying the trailblazers, and then pointing other people to them. Want to give a couple other people a chance to talk. Rosalind was the next person who had the hand raised. Rosalind, you're unmuted.
Can't hear.
Are you saying Rosalind can't hear? Can everybody else hear? If you can hear me, do a thumbs up. All right. Rosalind,
Okay.
we can hear you, Rosalind.
I lost you. Can y'all hear me?
We can hear you, Rosalind.
I don't know what went on there. Excuse me. Well, hello, everybody. Again, this is Rosalind. Listen, I'm glad you asked for, reactions, because when I hear government and federal and all of that, we're in the Bible Belt here in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and primarily our outreach is to our whole community and the church, by way of the church. So my question would be, what restrictions, what constraints, what limitations would that money that comes from the government have on the freedom of the church to really help couples? Because if they can do it without Christ, I'm kind of a Daniel person. I would put God's table before the government's table any day. And let's just see how pure we can be by taking their money if that's not discussed. And I'll read the letter. I hadn't read it, but I just know in past history, the government doesn't just give you, especially the church, especially now, whereas that fight doesn't have to happen when their hands are not in it. So my question to you,
let me respond in two ways. Let me respond in two ways to that. Okay. Number one, I've been managing federal grant projects in the healthy marriage field, virtually, for 15 of the last 20 years. And as long as you know how to play the rules, you can accomplish just about anything you want. And so we use, in the area where I'm at, we use federally funded healthy marriage grants as a community outreach, evangelization, and discipleship program, while operating purely within the federal fund restrictions. There are ways to do it. There are ways to do it and be successful, and there are ways you can run afoul. You just have to be smart. But that's the first point. But the second point, if you don't want to access government funding, everything that I just said here about government funding would also be true around private philanthropic funds. Meaning, look at education. There are gazillions of dollars. That's a technical term. I've got an MBA, so I can use gazillions. No, I'm just kidding. There's billions of dollars of charity spent in the educational system every year. And so you can access those dollars, and all 6 of those areas that I referred to. I was just able to quantify what the public funding is, but there's lots of private funding in it. And Rosalind, if that's where you feel most comfortable swimming in those waters, go for it. The same approach works. The same philosophy works, which is that we're solving. See, I think up until now, we've spent a lot of time just talking about the theoretical value of healthy marriages. And that's important to us, but it's not important to many other funding streams. So what I'm saying is, let's speak to what's important to them and demonstrate how we can solve their problems. Because that's my belief, is that our field can be at least a partial solution to many of the problems. So let's focus on them, because guess what? The money's already there. The money is already there. All right, Edge
Absolutely.
Ministries. Thanks, Rosalind.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, I just wanted to say, Dennis, I was writing and highlighting the whole time. I had printed off the memorandum, but I wrote "wow" 100 times probably beside your stuff. But what the point I thought about is, not only is this money available, but as taxpayers, it's our money. And so
Yes.
I don't think we always think about that. It's like we're paying for this, not just emotionally and in our communities that way, but it's our money. And so there should be some amount of stewardship that rises up in us to say, how can we help this money be better spent?
Exactly. And I think that's the theme that Jimmy started this with, is to say, wow, there's a lot of money, and it may not be all wisely spent. And here's the deal: the people that are spending the money, they want to solve the problems.
Right.
So if we show them that we have a solution that's both effective and cost effective, I think they'll be open to it.
Yeah.
But we need to connect the dots for them, to connect the dots, to say, this is why we think it can be a solution. But where I encourage, though, is instead of lobbying for a large amount of money to change a bunch of things, go for small buckets of money. And the idea is to say, we'd like to do a pilot because we think we will get these results. And if you get that far in the conversation, reach back out, I'd say to me, and say, I can help you kind of framework design around what the pilot would look like. Because I think the concept of selling organizations on pilots, if they can see how the results will be measured, I think you've got traction there. But like Jerry said, you guys are the ones that have the relationships on the ground. You guys are the ones that have to do the selling. Katie and Carl and I, we can kind of provide coaching from the sidelines, but you'll actually, be doing it. Carl, I've got another question from the Vanderburgs. Do you want me to take her? Do you want me to turn it back over to you? Again, Carl, you're in charge.
Keep going. You're doing great.
Okay. Vanderburgs, please go.
Yeah, thanks, Dennis. It was kind of more of a comment when I was thinking about NARMI and being a repository. Another huge benefit I see is being able to somehow capture other states where they've had success using this program, so that I can go and say, look, Florida had success using here. We did that with the parenting class that was developed in California and got approved in their court system to be, a court mandated parenting class. And this was a faith-based class and they got it approved. We were able to take that and take it to Wyoming and say, hey, look, they approved it here. And it made it a lot easier for us to cross that hurdle.
That's my point exactly. That's my point exactly, is that we want to learn from what's going on. And that's what I'm encouraging NARMI to be, is to be that central repository. And I tell you, one of the things that fueled this is that I was writing a grant application for an education grant out here in Panama City Beach. And I'm spending all this time compiling the information. And what I'm thinking to myself is, there's got to have been other people that have written these kind of grant applications. Why are we all starting from ground zero? That's just stupid. So if there's a word of advice, it's simply saying, let's not be stupid anymore. Let's collect the collective wisdom and see what we've learned, and propel the whole field forward. That's really what it's about. It's 100%. Good. Any other questions or comments? At this point, we've got 5 minutes left. And when Ron finished his thing, he said, hey, at the end of this, there'll be time for questions and answers. So why don't we open up to questions that any discussion or questions you might have for either Ron or for me? And if there aren't questions or comments, wow, we could be in a remarkable position. We could end early. Jerry's raising his hands.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I
just
couldn't pass this up.
But just so people know is, if you raise your hand, raise your virtual hand. If you raise your virtual hand, you go to the top of the queue and we'll see you. Because I only see like 6 people here. So raise the virtual hand, we'll see you all. But go ahead, Jerry, since nobody else asked or commented. Go ahead.
Sure. So I had heard that there's some folks in Florida already having success. I think Live the Life actually has a program that has some governmental approval and using some funds already. And so through some of the folks in our, in our network here, I've reached out to them and I'm hoping to have a future conversation about that. But maybe you could help us compile a list of references, so to speak, or curriculum, or the folks that are having success, like the gentleman just mentioned, where we could say, hey, what are you doing? How are you doing it? So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Maybe we can glean some ideas, but because if we could have some kind of central location, is that something that the Marriage Initiative can start compiling for us? Because like I said, I'm kind of in the process of doing some of those things, and I'll certainly share everything that I've learned, and I'm actually eager and excited to do that. But if any way that you could help us get that information, get it compiled or whatever, like I said, because I've heard that Live the Life's already doing some TANF funds with a marriage program down there. And so, hey, how can I do that in Missouri? How can I replicate that?
So let me say a couple of things. So first of all, that whole repository thing, and if you go ahead and read through the whole email or the whole memo, what you're seeing is that Carl and I are proposing to NARMI is that they become that central repository. And so, yeah. And then on the other one is on the TANF funds. So it turns out that I was the co-author of the federal grant application for Live the Life that you're referring to, and I'm the project director on it. And on the line are several other people, on the call are several other people from Live the Life. So, but I wanted to say this, part of the goal of the CMI Fund is to be equipping everybody here to be able to access the next round, or at least to be able to compete for the next round of federal funding, if you would like to. That federal funding for healthy marriage comes out every 5 years. We're 2 years into the grant project. But part of my goal, or part of the process, is to be equipping those of you that want to compete for that to be able to compete. Now, there's only 30 awards that are given, so it's a highly competitive environment on it. But yes, that's part of what we're looking for. Logan, I think you were the next person to raise your hand.
Yeah, not to get too far into the weeds, but schools are a passion, here in the community and family. So how do we introduce the concept of regular marriage maintenance, getting parents invested? Because the schools would love it because they see the value in it. They're always trying to get more parental involvement, and they see parents as kind of a lot of times the issue. How do we introduce that without that stigma,
Yeah, and so that's really, so when I look at that whole area of education, and that's one that I think has potentially high thing. So as you guys have figured out by now, Dennis wears multiple hats in the marriage arena. And one of my hats is I'm the volunteer manager of Northwest Florida of Live the Life. Again, it's one of 8 hats that I wear. And so, Logan, really, I want Bay County to be one of the pilots where we actually are piloting doing this. But the challenge on the educational system, if you notice the way I worded it, is that those schools that have a high percentage of participation in the programs, that's going to be the magic bullet here. I tell you this, if we had 100% participation in these kind of programs, and those of you like Ron, you do these skills-based programs a long time, I think you will say, if every parent in a school got their marriage act together, boy, the test scores would skyrocket. That's not going to be the hard part. The hard part is, how do you get the participation up to a significant level? And so we're going to be looking at incentives. And so, yes, that's where the next leg in this effort is going to be, is getting the participation up. So yes, lots of opportunities, lots of problems, lots of questions that are not yet answered, but they are well worth looking for the answers. Now, we are at the 1 hour mark. And so those of you that need to leave can leave. Those of you that want to stick around and continue the conversation, you can stick around and continue the conversation, assuming that's okay with Carl and Katie. Tom, you're the next person who raised your hand, or at least your
Yes.
virtual hand again. If
Yes.
anybody else wants to speak, raise your virtual hand, not your real hand. Tom, go ahead.
Yes, I had a question for Ron. Ron, you talked about engaging churches, so I'm switching gears a little bit. But what have you found is the most effective way for engaging pastors who I think have their own agendas? I mean, there are a lot of pressures, limited resources, and if you approach them about here's another thing to put on your plate, I'm not sure how positive reception one would get, but just curious as to your thoughts on that.
So thank you, Tom, for that question. That's a good question. So we found that most churches, I think, have a deep burden for marriage and family. They just don't know what to do. Not too many pastors have a lot of seminary training when it comes to marriage counseling or really working with marriage couples. And so we found that the best way to do that is to come alongside, if you can, individually, meeting with pastors and letting them know that you're there to come alongside and help. You know, in other words, put your own agenda aside and say, hey, we're part of this together with you. You know, our mission is the Great Commission, right? And that's something that we share. And we'd like to help you produce couples and families that are healthy, because the research is clear that when marriages are strong and families are strong, giving goes up, and also the attendance goes up in that church. And so start, you know, really touting the benefits of what we're trying to do. So we're meeting with pastors right now, Dave and Cheryl and myself, and we're coming alongside just saying, we don't want to do the work for you. We want to be a help and you know, augment what you're already doing so that you can continue to grow in your church in all ways. No, we're not just talking about because marriage ministry is important, but there's also children's, youth. And so we just believe that the way to start is going upstream and dealing with marriages and families, because when those are strong, the rest of the church will tend to be strong as well. So we also have community get-togethers where pastors have small groups. We might be a little bit unique in this area, but for instance, Clovis, a little suburb of Fresno, has a ministerial association. They meet every week for prayer. And so just to take clusters like that and meet with them, because, you know, we have relationships with most of those pastors, and just say, look, how can we as a group really influence the rest of our community by showing how healthy marriages and marriage skills and programs like this could really, you know, help other churches. That when we first came to Fresno, there was kind of a competition between churches. I think we're all familiar with how that works sometimes, right? And so we found that as we've grown in our ministry, we're finding that more and more churches and pastors want to work together, because really we're on the same team. We have the same Great Commission. We have the same vision, if you will. And you're right. Most churches, if you approach a church and say, hey, look, we'd like you to do these programs, they're going to look at you, you know, and say, we don't have any time to add anything else. We are not there for that purpose. We're there to help take work off their plates. And so, for instance, one of the issues pastors have is counseling, right? And trust me, it's getting more complex with trauma and other things that are going on. COVID-19 has caused so many issues, even in marriages. So we're interested in coming alongside and say, here's how we can actually help provide, you know, resources for you to help take things off your plate and to help you grow your church so that people will be healthier and people can actually, you know, give more money. Our church after COVID, the giving went way up, our attendance went way up. And I think it's because we have a healthy marriage ministry, and that just is a natural outcome. When you have a healthy family, you have a healthy church. Healthy churches create healthy communities. And so, you know, I believe in meeting with pastors one at a time for certain. By doing that, by the way, I've had those pastors reach out and say, hey, can you help my teenage son? Do you know where I can send him for treatment? So you can also become a confidant, if you will, with those pastors and build that relationship that way. Obviously, it all takes time, but it does build and create a real synergistic approach, if you will, to healthy pastoral ministries. Does that help at all?
Yeah, very good.
One
Okay.
other point I'd make is that Carl's topic was actually going to be speaking into this as well. So part of my response, Tom, is stay tuned for coming attractions, and maybe I won't take all of Carl's time next time, and he'll get to respond as well. So good. I do want to be really respectful of people's time, so I'm going to suggest that we close at this point. Katie, who are you calling upon to lead? So we had an opening prayer. Who would you like to call upon to be the closing prayer?
Well, Carl, I think Carl had just a couple points he wanted to mention before signing off. Is that still the case, Carl?
Yeah, absolutely, Katie. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that we have some fun speakers coming up in the coming months. Jeff Kemp, many of you know Jeff Kemp. He and his dad were former NFL quarterbacks, but Jeff entered the family strengthening space. He was the director of Northwest Families that was based out of Washington State. He's going to be with us in December. And in January, we're going to have Brad Wilcox, the director of the National Marriage Project. Really interesting guy who has a book coming out, who understands all the data and all the research. So a lot of fun things that are happening in that space. And yeah, I'll be talking next month about something we do in San Antonio that we would like to share a little bit about what we're doing with you, and see if you want to do something similar. We do these monthly, or actually quarterly, roundtable events that have multiple layers of strategy attached to them. Our quarterly roundtable events, they meet an immediate need, they attract new people to your movement, and they provide a place for people to connect. So we're real excited to share more about that. Thank you, Dennis. I echo everything you shared today. I'm really glad we took more time. I think we really needed to take more time just to hear about this. One last thing that's kind of related to it. I had two funny meetings, back-to-back meetings. My first meeting this morning was with a group of divorce attorneys, and my second meeting this morning was with the Bishop of the Diocese of San Antonio. So it was a very diverse group. But one of the things that the attorney said that I think was really wise, and it resonates, it rhymes a little bit with what you said, Dennis. They were talking about the fact that there's a lot of legislation already in place that's kind of been forgotten about. And they were speaking in particular of that when couples file for a divorce that have kids, they're required to go through the parenting class. They said that many of the family law judges have forgotten this, and they no longer require it just because they've forgotten about it, and nobody's reminding them. And one of the things that they said is maybe the easiest thing is just to wake us up to what's already on the books, and let's just re-implement what we already have. And I think, Dennis, it rhymes a little bit of what you said, in that people are already spending money on education. They're already spending money on domestic violence. Well, what we need to do is just help them direct that funding in a more effective way. So thanks again for the time together.
Thank you, Carl. And as you guys know, we will be posting this on our YouTube site following the recording, and I will send the link out to you guys. And thank you all again for joining us. And as Carl mentioned, we have some exciting speakers coming up in the coming months, so you want to make sure to not miss those. And Brady Vandenberg in Casper, Wyoming will be closing us in prayer today. Thank you, Brady.
Lord God, yes, we do thank you so much. I thank you for all these marriage champions, for Dennis and Carl, and how you positioned them at this time in such a way that they can just lead a movement like this. I thank you for every representation on this call, every marriage champion who you've touched their heart, Lord, to make a difference. And I pray that you would continue to move in such a way, Lord, that you would just start these movements across this nation, and that we might get to see you move in just an amazing and impactful way. And so we commit this time, our energy, and our resources for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you all. We hope that you have a blessed weekend. We'll see you back here next month. Bye-bye.